And now to talk about the states that are pressing fraud charges and some ongoing investigations about how your tax dollars may be being abused is the Center Square reporter, Elise Apel. Elise, a lot of attention's been on Ilhan Omar for quite some time, but they're looking in Minnesota to try to get some information and even trying to subpoena her. But this story you put out there at thecentersquare.com, we've got some updates to discuss. Tell us about the latest there.
Yeah, so earlier this week, Democrats voted against in a House fraud committee there in the state. Democrats voted against Republican efforts to subpoena Representative Ilhan Omar. They were trying to get documents between her and some convicted fraudsters in the Feeding Our Future fraud investigation. So Republicans are asking for these documents. Ilhan Omar, representative, she has not responded to any of their requests. Her office has ghosted them. They've heard zero responses. They've asked her to come testify. They haven't heard anything from her. And so now, just this morning, it was announced the Republican Chair Committee, Representative Kristen Robbins, is actually asking U.S. Congress to step in and force Ilhan Omar to send over those documents to them.
You know, it's really fascinating when you have, a state legislative body wanting to look at one of their state's members of Congress. All right, you don't really see that too much, where the state legislature is starting to, pick up some stones and look into some closets and whatnot of members of Congress. So I would imagine that that's an interesting dynamic that's kind of elevating this issue even more, a jurisdictional question, right?
Right. Well, and that was kind of Democrats on the point. That was their point on the committee. They were like, this is unprecedented. We have never subpoenaed a sitting member of Congress for documents as a state committee. So that was their point, but Republicans are pointing out, this level of fraud is unprecedented. The alleged connections between Representative Ilhan Omar and these convicted fraudsters is unprecedented. So they're really trying to seek answers on that.
Let's talk a little bit about what exactly is at the root of this, right? I mean, there's obviously the drama that we're seeing unfold of this jurisdictional question and, state legislature wanting to look into a member of Congress. But talk about the Feeding Our Futures fraud that has some convictions. How much are we talking about of taxpayer dollars being abused here, and what happened?
Yeah, so we're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars. So tens of millions of dollars that were allegedly lost through this Feeding Our Future program. So this was a congressional program that then received additional funding during COVID-19. And so the question that Republicans have for Representative Ilhan Omar is she actually passed some legislation that took down some of the guardrails around this program that were protecting the program from some cases of fraud. Now, Representative Omar argued, well, this was needed during COVID to make sure that everyone was getting the food that they needed through this program. Everyone was being fed that was intended to be fed by this program. But Republicans are saying, why did you intentionally take down some of these guardrails that were protecting this program from fraud, while also, being in communication with some of the people that were then convicted of this fraud? So that's kind of the deeper underlying issue. A program that received a lot of funding during COVID, and then at the same time, Representative Omar was taking down some of the guardrails around that program, and Republicans are just asking why, and trying to figure out, and that's what they're trying to receive, is the communications between her and the people that were in charge of implementing this program at kind of the local level and have now since been convicted of fraud. That's what they're really trying to figure out, is what was her level of communication with them and what were they talking about in these, emails.
Well, and the idea of an elected official allegedly being involved in some kind of fraudulent activity, that's clearly much different than, say, just some random person who's not an elected official or in government who might have done some fraudulent activity around the Paycheck Protection Program during COVID-19.
Exactly. Right, and I mean, in federal prosecutors, they've called the Feeding Our Future case one of the largest pandemic era fraud schemes. So we're talking like $250 million. And, Republicans are asking, okay, where did that go? And what relationship did our elected representative have with those fraudsters?
Now, another story where states and prosecutors, they're looking to go after these types of instances to hold people accountable for the misuse or alleged misuse of tax dollars. And we got a story out of Michigan, and this is somebody who is actually an official of some capacity on a board that's now charged with 16 felonies. Tell us what we know about Fay Beydoun in Michigan.
Yeah, so Fay Beydoun, she was a former member of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So basically that's, a corporation that is funded by the state and helps, different businesses kind of produce, help local economies, and they give subsidies, taxpayer-funded subsidies to different businesses throughout Michigan. So she's been charged, like you said, with 16 felonies tied to the alleged misuse of a $20 million state grant that was awarded to her nonprofit called Global Link International by Medic while she was a sitting member of the committee. And so she was a deciding factor in, the funding going to this nonprofit. That $20 million was given to this nonprofit, and it was used for all kinds of crazy things. They've talked about a coffee maker. That was kind of one of the big stories, that, a $600 coffee maker was one of the big receipts that was used. It was kind of a pivot point. And this has been an ongoing story for a number of years. The Center Square has been on top of it, reporting on it for a number of years. But just this week, they finally announced criminal charges against Fay Beydoun. Attorney General Dana Nessel called this. She said, "We allege that Fay Beydoun sought and received $20 million, operating a criminal enterprise, and lied repeatedly on how she actually used those funds." So this is just another case that we're seeing all across the nation of massive, massive levels of fraud.
Again, during the COVID-19 pandemic, tons of tax dollars infused into the economy through the Paycheck Protection Program Fund. It was really meant to help small businesses keep their employees on after local governments and state governments said, no, you can't have your business operate. But there was a rampant abuse in the unemployment system. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars misspent by, given to people who were employed. Then you get into other instances of these types of grants. And again, as we said, I mean, it's one thing when, somebody on the street is charged with fraud. It's another thing when either an elected official or somebody appointed to an official board actually is alleged to have done these types of things. So we'll be watching what happens there in that Michigan story. But even yet another story here. Charges against Debbie Long in Wisconsin. What's going on with this Medicaid fraud case?
Yeah, so this is another story, another Medicaid fraud story of nearly $2.2 million, where this Milwaukee woman allegedly took the funds for basically a money laundering scheme, fraudulent transactions that she filed to receive taxpayer funding for. And then went on and bought a car wash, a new car, Kit's frozen custard in Milwaukee. So we see this instance of taxpayer funding going directly into buying these businesses for this woman for services that she never actually was giving to people in the community.
It almost sounds like an episode from Breaking Bad where they're getting illicit money and they're going out and buying car washes
exactly
to set up a money laundering operation. And
the funniest thing about it is her lawyer called it an obvious clerical error, but not fraud. So
yeah, I saw a line in that story about like 13,000 hours billed in one day or something like that. It's just, I don't know. When you see these types of numbers and the types of things that, again, a Mercedes-Benz, a car wash, a custard store, these types of things being, used with allegedly your tax dollars, and the accountability there needs to obviously be transparent and above board.
And that's really why the Trump administration has kind of declared this war on fraud. And there seems to be a lot better relationship between the federal and the state governments, or even just independent investigators. There's a report made, recently there was a report in Ohio about some potential fraud there. And right away, Vice President J.D. Vance was like, we're gonna jump on that and see what's going on there. So it seems like maybe this administration is more responsive to these reports of fraud.
And appointed U.S. attorneys across the country from the federal government, from the Trump administration and the Department of Justice, clearly being given a certain type of order. Get out there and find this fraud. Let's hold people accountable. And we'll definitely be reporting on that here at the Center Square. Elise Apel with the Center Square. Greatly appreciate your time today.